Hello and welcome back to another tutorial with me, Jade at So Jealous in Plymouth, Devon. I am a crochet maker and I also run a yarn shop. Now today we're going to be going through the magic ring technique. I'm going to be showing you in acrylic yarn because a lot of people find seeing the stitches in chenille yarn difficult, and then we will complete this tutorial with the chenille yarn to show you how this will look. Now your magic ring is the beginning step for all of your amigurumi projects pretty much, so it's a really important step for you to be able to get started on this amigurumi journey. So the materials that I'm using today, I've got a James C. Brett Top Value Super Chunky yarn in a light grey, and then I'm also using Woolens Bunny Baby, which is one of my preferred chenilles of choice. And just to show you some other materials, there are bamboo crochet hooks which are available. I don't personally use bamboo. I don't really like how they feel and I find them very expensive for what they offer. And amigurumis work quite tightly and I always worry about breaking a bamboo hook. For the purpose of the tutorial, I'm using a 5.5 metal hook. Ordinarily for amigurumi, I'd be using a 4.5 or a 5, nothing quite as large as a 5.5 millimeter. So before we get into the actual magic ring, I want to have a conversation with you about chenille yarn, because chenille yarn is slightly different. It is special and you have to work with it differently. Now, my preferred brand, like I said, is Woolens Bunny Baby. I also really enjoy Signet Jelly Baby. There are other types of chenilles or like jumbo sizes. I carry in the shop James C. Brett Huggable, which is a super large chenille yarn, which has a lovely texture also. So, like I said, chenille yarn is a bit special, and it's that specialness, that softness comes from how it is made. So you can see here, I'm just removing some of the plush fibre from the strand here, and you can see that I've then exposed these white threads. So there are two main strands. Each strand has two threads. So there's 4 threads in total that are made into 2 strands, and that chenille fibre is sandwiched between those threads, and then those 2 threads are twisted super tight, and that is how the plush string is made. The plush is sort of woven in between, and as soon as you cut that yarn, those white threads start to unravel and you get what we call here shed or fluff, whatever word you prefer. Now that's perfectly normal. That happens with any brand of yarn that is true chenille. You do get some blanket yarns which are not true chenille and they don't shed in the same way, but a true chenille yarn will shed in that way. It's not a fault with the product. Now, because of how the fibre is made, because that structure comes from those twists, you also can overwork this yarn. So with acrylic yarn, you can frog and frog and frog. With chenille yarn, you can't do that. I'm just adding some friction here along this particular strand, and you can see that the friction, once done over and over again, creates what I call splitting in the fibre. And it's at this point where most people come really unstuck with chenille, because once you've got that splitting, it's really difficult to get the yarn to move over itself properly without getting stuck, and then if you keep tugging, it will eventually snap. For this reason, the best way to work with chenille is to hold a looser tension. If you are someone that works tightly, I do recommend going up a hook size. So I'm now going to demonstrate to you how to do the magic ring with the acrylic yarn, which will then follow up with the chenille. So in order to create your magic ring, you're going to leave yourself a tail and you're going to drape it over your fingers to create a cross shape like this. So just to break down how we get to that cross shape, I'm going to show you again in a bit more detail. So I'm taking that tail and I'm holding it with my bottom 2 fingers, and then I'm going to wrap. So you can see that I'm going from left to right, and that's how it looks across the front of my fingers at a slight angle. I'm then coming around and I'm then going right to left. And I'll have this X shape, and I'm taking my tail and holding it back underneath my fingers. So you can see I've got my tail held by my 4th finger and my bottom or tail of my yarn held by my ring finger there. And it's really important that this piece of string that I'm pointing to lies on the bottom and that this one is sat on top of it, and it must be in that formation to make this magic ring technique work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go underneath that first strand, and I'm going to come over the top of the next one, and using the throat of my hook I'm going to pull that underneath, and it creates like this sideways A shape, if you can see that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm then going to twist my crochet hook, and you can see here that I've then created a loop on my hook, and I will wiggle that to create a bit more room within that loop. So just to show you that again, I have my X formation, and I'm going underneath that first piece of string or yarn. I'm coming over the top, and with the throat of my hook I'm pulling that underneath to create this sideways A, and then I twist to create a loop on my crochet hook. And I give that a bit of a wiggle to give myself more room, and then holding that loop on my crochet hook, I'm going to go underneath this yarn, catch it in the throat of my hook, and I'm going to pull it through that loop that I already have. And you'll see here that I'll move my crochet hook away from me just to expand and make that loop on my hook bigger. Now once I've done that, you'll have something that looks like this. You have your ring and you have a tail, but we'll do this process one more time just to show you how we do that. So we're wrapping, we're creating our X shape. We don't want to hold it too tight because we do need to make sure the yarn moves through our fingers. We come underneath that yarn, which should always be on the bottom, and using the throat of our hook we pull the other yarn through, and then we twist. And we want to loosen up on our hook that loop, so we can then hold it and go underneath and pick up this strand of yarn and then pull that through the loop. And in order to make that loop bigger on my crochet hook, I will push my crochet hook away from me as I'm pulling it through. So now I've got my magic ring. You can see that here, and I also have my tail. And when we do the magic ring, we are working into the circle and also around the tail. So you'll hold them both together like so. And then what we're doing is we're going in and underneath the tail. So I've got 2 threads on my hook. I'm then wrapping as I would ordinarily for a chain and pulling through. You can see I've now got 2 loops on my hook, and then I'm wrapping and I'm pulling through both of those loops. And again, in order to create room for me to pull my crochet hook through, I push my crochet hook away from me as I pull through. So we're going to go underneath both the magic ring and the tail, wrap and come back out. You can see I'm pushing away from me, wrapping and pulling through. And you'll see that each stitch that I've made has that typical V shape that we see in crochet. So into the magic ring, wrap and come out, wrap and pull through, and you can see me pushing my crochet hook away from me. And I'm going to do that 6 times here. I'm just going in, wrapping and out, wrapping and through, in, wrapping and out, wrapping and through. And you can see here I've got that V shape, so that tells me how many stitches that I have. And they are around the side of the project in Amigurumi using this magic ring technique. So what we now need to do is we now need to cinch this magic ring closed, which is why we've worked around our tail, and gently pinching at the top of my work and doing a slow but firm pull. We're going to pull that tail, and you'll see that our magic ring then closes, and that's now nice and tight. And then in order to start your first round, what you'll do is you'll identify your first stitch, which you'll see from that V formation, and then you're going to work a single crochet into that stitch, and that becomes the first stitch of your first round. So Amigurumi is worked in the round, it's worked in a spiral. You'll need to make sure that when you're going into that stitch that you've gone under both parts of the V as you would do for traditional crochet. That technique is no different. And then you're going to complete your first stitch. And what you would do at this point is you would insert a stitch marker into that first stitch, so that you know once you've got back to this stitch marker, that is the start then of your next round. So let's do that in chenille yarn. So Same process as before. We're going to create that X shape over our fingers. Nothing changes, it's exactly the same. So I've now got this X shape. And again, I need to make sure that that piece of yarn is on the bottom and touches my fingers. I go underneath and loop over and grab the strand and pull underneath to create this sideways A. And then I twist my hook and I'm just loosening that loop. With the chenille yarn, you want to keep it a bit looser than you ordinarily would. And then I'm going to come underneath the other strand and I'm going to pull that through. Again, just that back and forward motion is loosening that loop on my hook. But I'm taking that yarn and I'm pulling it through like so. And then you can see, because I've worked loosely, that knot there is quite large. Now I want to make that a bit tighter, but not too tight, because I don't want to impact the integrity of the chenille yarn. So by putting a little bit of tension on the tail or the working yarn on my finger and then pulling down with my crochet hook like so, I tighten that knot just a little bit, but you can see it's not very tight. I can still, like I've demonstrated there, undo that knot quite easily without impacting the integrity of the yarn. So tension is really key here. So underneath, picking up, pulling underneath to create the sideways A, twisting to create the loop on our hook, and then going back up, picking that strand and pulling it through. And then we want to loosen this knot, which is quite large but not too tight. So we pinch ever so slightly, and then using the working yarn we're going to pull away from us, and then using our hook we're going to pull towards us, so in opposite directions. And sometimes we can weave back and forth a little bit in order to tighten up that knot. Now you can see here the knot isn't really tight, but it is tighter. And then we're going to do exactly the same as before. I've got my magic ring and I have my tail, and I'm going to be crocheting into the ring and underneath the tail at the same time. So holding them both together, in, wrap, come out, wrap and pull through both. And again, you'll see me using my crochet hook when I pull through those two stitches, pushing it away from me in order to give me maximum room to get my crochet hook through those two strands. So the same as before, we're going to do 6, like so. And again, you can see that V formation quite well defined, but you can also see that my stitches here are relatively loose in comparison to how they looked in the acrylic yarn, and that's really key. Now this is the part where most people become unstuck with chenille, because they've not kept that looseness when doing the magic ring stitches. When they come to pull their string, they'll find that they get that separation and it gets stuck. But you can see here, because I've been quite mindful of my tension, that has closed, no problem at all. And again, what you'll do is you'll find your first stitch, which is that V formation along the side, and you're going to crochet into that like so. And normally with amigurumi, your first round is some form of an increase round, which means you'll be doing 2 stitches. So what I want to show you here is how my magic ring looks, how the stitches look along the side. So it's important, if you can't find your stitches, it might be because you're not looking around the side of the project. The stitches lie different in amigurumi than they do with traditional crochet, worked in rows back and forward. Now this is the back side of the magic ring, and I'm going to work a ring here of increase rounds around. So I've now got 12 stitches instead of 6, and I want to show you what I do now in order to really secure that tightness in my magic ring. So I'm flipping it over and I'm threading my tail with a darning needle. And what you can see here is along the back there's 2 strands, a pair of strands that run along the inside of the magic ring. Now a lot of amigurumi creators will tell you to crochet your first round around your tail, and I disagree with that approach, because if you decide to tighten, what you're tightening is the first round and not the actual magic ring. So with this technique, you take your darning needle with your thread underneath those bars. Again, it's important that you've kept your tension loose in the beginning, and I flip over to make sure that I can't see my darning needle. If I can see my darning needle, I've gone through the back and the front of the stitch, which I don't want to do. So again, I'm going to pick up a couple of more stitches, and I'll do 3 at a time usually because I don't want to create a lot of tension over my strands. So if I can pull through 3 at one time, all the more for it. And again, you can see here I very lightly pinch as I pull, and when I'm pulling my yarn, I'm following through in the direction. I'm not bringing it back over to myself. It all goes in the same direction. And again, that's just to minimize friction along the strand. And then what I'll do is I'll do a slow but firm tug of the chenille yarn in order to cinch in. And that is your chenille yarn magic ring. Again, it will take practice. It doesn't happen overnight quickly, but this is how you do a traditional magic ring method, or at least it's the way that I prefer to do my magic ring. And what we will do in another video is show you a cheat hack called the chain 2.